Joining us for today's conversation is Huntsville Independent School District Superintendent Dr. Scott Sheppard, and I'm particularly excited for this conversation because you're the superintendent of my two kids' schools. So thanks for your work and thanks for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
We're having this conversation today in part because the Texas Legislature is soon going to be discussing public education. And so it's something that's going to be on the minds of a lot of Texans of faith throughout the state. And you've spent your career working in public education with a lot of time in rural Texas. So I want to start the conversation today by talking about why you think public education is so important to our local communities.
Well, I'll start by saying that the local public school is the center of the community, especially in small towns.
Right.
It's part of the community's identity. Kids grow up wanting to be a Huntsville Hornet or a Nederland Bulldog or even a Katy Tiger in a bigger district. It's just kind of the way we're ingrained in the way we kind of center around our children, center around our community. Students and programs in public schools represent the entire community, not just a select group within the community, which makes it easy to identify with your local public school. And public schools offer opportunity for all children to succeed, which is a trademark of public schools. So no matter what a student's gifts may be or challenges may be, there is a place for all kids and something for everyone, from advanced academics, career and technology pathways, fine arts, sports, and countless clubs and organizations, which are often limited in other types of schools.
Right. I like that you talked about all students, and that is one of the benefits of a public school is that every student can participate.
Right.
And so I love that, and we're going to talk about it more. And one of the reasons we're going to have that conversation is because the Texas Legislature is going to be talking about this idea of vouchers to help fund non-public education. And listeners have heard that word voucher, but I want to start by defining some terms today. So other terms that folks might hear are things like ESA, education savings accounts, or the term money follows the student. How are those related to vouchers?
Well, vouchers are vouchers. All of those terms have come to be, quite frankly, because politicians and others who stand to gain from the privatization of schools have learned that the word voucher has a negative connotation. So they've replaced that word with other things that sound more appealing.
Right.
That's just part of the game, right? And in Texas, the word voucher has a particularly dark and sinister past. All the way back to 1954, Governor Allen Shivers formed a committee to find ways to circumvent integration in Texas schools. And the plan that they came up with was called vouchers. And the vouchers were targeted to parents who were opposed to integration. And so the plan was to give public funds to parents to pull their kids out of public schools that were being integrated. That plan failed. But knowing the history of the word voucher, you can see why savvy politicians would stop using that word, because we kind of all know what the history of that word is. And while today's version of vouchers maybe isn't as overtly sinister, there would in reality be similar results. We know already that the demographics of private schools do not reflect the demographics of Texas. And any effort to divert public funds to help fund private schools would likely lead to more segregation. That's what's happened in other states that have passed similar programs. So if nothing else, history tells us that that's what the plan does.
Yeah. And follow up on that, how would that harm our local communities? I mean, you've talked about the importance of public schools to the communities. So why should we be worried about that if we're people of faith who care about strong communities?
Well, I think there are several points to that. One is it may not harm your local community.
Right.
I mean, I'll be upfront and honest about that. I'm not afraid of vouchers destroying the public school. I think people that go to that extreme in the debate on either side are kind of losing sight of really what the issue is. In all likelihood, and we'll probably get into this more in the conversation, a voucher is not going to increase a student's ability to attend a quality private school.
Right.
A voucher on its own won't pay even a fraction of the tuition to a quality private school. So what in essence would happen is it would draw down money that's meant for public schools and divert that money to those who are already attending a private school in the form of like a rebate, if you will,
Yep.
which that would be negative potentially to the whole public school system.
Right. Let's talk about that funding piece a little bit, because there are very few people who actually really understand public school funding in Texas, and I'm certainly not one of those. But kind of a thumbnail understanding. Public school funding is a combination of both state and local dollars plus a little bit of federal funding. Can you give just a quick description of how our school funding system works to serve the whole state, and why that system, that setup is so important?
Yeah, well, you hit it on the head. It is a complex system. I used to teach school finance at the university level part-time, and I definitely am very familiar with our system. But you said it perfectly. Public schools are funded through a combination of state dollars, local tax dollars in the form of property tax, and then a sprinkling of federal money. I have to say on average, because understand that it would be totally different from community to community.
Right.
On average, it's about a 50-50 split. One is slightly bigger than the other with a little bit of federal money in there. And what makes that good for the public is it's public dollars funding public education. So the public has a voice in how public schools are governed, through school board elections. So you have local representation. So if you're a local taxpayer in Huntsville, Texas, like you are,
yes,
then you get to vote in your school board election, and that school board is going to govern how your schools are run.
Right.
Taxpayers as a whole have a voice in how public schools run in the state. That's not true for other forms of schools. So charter schools, unlike public schools, are funded. They are technically public schools, but they do not answer to an elected board in the community where they are. And they're funded 100% by state dollars. So the citizens of Texas fund the charter school. The citizens of Texas have no voice in how the charter school is run or operated. They do follow the state curriculum like a true public school does, so that makes them similar. Private schools, they're funded by those who choose to attend. And rightfully so, the private school doesn't have to answer to the taxpayer. There is no governing board that you get to vote on. There is no standardized curriculum. Private schools can teach what they want, how they want to teach it, and answer only to the parents who pay with their own personal funds to attend that school, which takes us back to why using public funds to fund private education is inherently against our democracy and our way of life, is that those who use public dollars should have to answer to the public that fund them.
Yeah. Speaking about the funding piece, I think one of the concerns from public school advocates is that if there are private school vouchers, that would in some way or long-term divert dollars from public schools. Is that a fair criticism, and how would that be detrimental to both public schools and our communities?
Well, there's a finite pot of money, right? I mean, so funding private school vouchers would eventually erode funding for public schools. Now, the plan put forth today, which could change in a special session, there's a claim that wouldn't occur, but you can look at other states that have gone down this road, and what ends up happening is more and more money gets diverted. And so eventually, yes, there would be a loss of funding to public school. Through economic upturns and downturns, our funding has stayed relatively stagnant over time as public schools. When accounting for inflation, we're not funded as well as we were funded a decade ago.
Right.
While the dollar amount has gone up, the number of students has gone up.
Right.
The demands have increased. So there's no doubt that a voucher program would erode funding for public schools. In
one of the populations that I know Texans of Faith are particularly particularly care about, and I know I've heard you speak to this as well, is making sure that our public schools are strong, especially for low-income families. And I know this is a passion of yours. So I wonder if you have particular thoughts about how a voucher program would impact low-income families, both here in Huntsville and throughout the state.
Well, I mean, I hate to be this strong, but I will start by saying that people who believe that vouchers will increase school choice for low-income students, they're either being purposefully dishonest or they're just naive. The reality is the impact of vouchers on low-income families would be almost non-existent, except for what we've already talked about, which is diversion of state funding from their public school, which, by the way, would be detrimental to students of all income levels, right, that attend public schools. Low-income kids are almost guaranteed they would not benefit from vouchers for many reasons. First, the voucher itself would not be enough money to attend a quality private school, and low-income families don't have enough to make up the difference. Private schools typically don't provide transportation, which is a very critical component for a low-income family to get their child to school. And secondly, private schools, they get to choose their students. You know, when people say school choice, really a better phrase would be school's choice, because it's the school's choice. It's not the parent's choice. It's not the kid's choice. The school in a private school situation will ultimately decide whether they let a student in. And unfortunately, low-income students often would not be admitted to private schools. We know that from their current track record. And they would be denied for a lot of reasons, income being one of them. But there are a lot of other reasons why those students may be denied access to a private school, especially a quality private school, even with a voucher check in their hand. So the impact for a typical low-income family would be there would be no benefit. There would be no increased choice because of a voucher.
Yeah. I also heard you talk recently about the impact this could have on families who would choose, who could potentially choose to homeschool their children. Any concerns about that under current proposals?
Well, I mean, I want to be clear, and maybe I haven't said it. I'm not anti parental choice. Absolutely not. And I'm not anti private school. I'm not anti homeschool. I think there are situations where people make those choices for legitimate reasons, and they do a great job of educating their kids.
Absolutely.
The difference is that I don't think someone should receive tax dollars from you and I with no accountability for the quality of education they're going to provide to their child. So literally, you could get a voucher check under the current proposal to homeschool your child. That child may or may not get educated, but the money's gone. And at some point in time, when if the homeschool succeeds, great. Good for the family, good for the kid. If it fails, that child's going to be dropped back on our doorstep at some point in time, woefully behind their peers because of the gap that was created.
Yeah. I feel like going into the special session, we have a real opportunity, or we had a real opportunity going into the regular session because of this, record surplus the state was facing. And I feel like a lot of the conversation has now focused on vouchers and what I would suggest we shouldn't be doing. But I think we should also have a proactive conversation. What would benefit these families we're talking about? What do we wish the state would be considering doing with these surplus dollars?
Well, clearly, I think fully funding public education should be their priority. We've seen an exodus from the profession, and I will tell you what the polls indicate and what just common sense and conversation indicates is that teachers are leaving the profession partly because of finance, but mainly because of the beatdown they're taking from politicians in Austin.
Right.
And so the feeling, the demoralization that has occurred through this session has been detrimental to us as a profession and to our communities. Fully funding public schools with those surplus dollars, funding a teacher pay raise, funding cost of living for retired teachers, which is on the ballot for November, so that
Right.
would be a good thing. Those are the kinds of things that should be our priority. I mean, after all, public schools educate 5.5 million students. Currently, 300 to 400,000 kids attend private school in Texas. So we're focusing on what's good for 300,000 as opposed to what's good for 5.5 million.
Right.
Doesn't seem to be the way I was raised in terms of representation and democracy and how that should work. So that would be a point. And then one of the phrases that I use pretty often, and maybe I've already said, is that it's best to keep public schools public and private schools private. Quality private schools don't want vouchers any more than I do.
Right.
Because they know that with government money, eventually will come government oversight. People choose private schools for valid reasons. If they wanted government oversight of their schools, they would stay in the public school.
Yeah, right.
So let's keep that separate. The system works. There is plenty of school choice from, as you mentioned, homeschool, charter school, private school, and quality public schools as well. So I think focusing on strengthening the system we have rather than trying to tear down the system would be a better use of time from our governing officials in Austin.
Amen. I can give you an amen for that one. We are here in the Hawkins Administration Building. You are an educator. I feel like now is the time for homework. We have listeners of faith throughout the state who are listening to this. What homework might you give Texans of faith who care about public schools?
I would say get to know the facts. Don't believe propaganda. You don't have to believe everything I said today. Do your homework.
Right.
Find out what's really going on. Find out what the impact has been in other states that have passed voucher plans and decide if that's what you want your Texas to look like. And don't let a handful of people tell you what our state should look like and what our educational system should be. Do your own homework. Contact your legislators and the governor's office. Express your concerns and do it professionally. And let them know that you don't want to see public dollars diverted to private education. And as I said before, we're better off keeping our public schools public and our private schools private. And I think that's a phrase that people can understand and hopefully would agree with.
All right. Well, Dr. Sheppard, really appreciate the time today. As I said, you are the superintendent for my public schools where my kids attend. I'm going to give you a chance. Any shameless plugs, anything Huntsville ISD related, anything you want to leave us with today?
We're so proud of our school district. We've a lot has changed in the past 5 or 6 years. We passed a bond by 78%, which shows community support for community schools, right? People that want to pour in resources to help our schools be better for our kids, another strength of public schools. We're very excited about the academic progress we've made and the fact that we offer really every CTE pathway for kids to explore career paths through their public school. Literally, it goes back to something for everyone, from educating severe and profound special needs students to gifted and talented in many other ways. We're just proud of what we do, proud of our community, and sting 'em Hornets.
Sting 'em Hornets. All right. Thanks, Dr. Sheppard. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.